Daniel had all the power money could buy, yet he couldn't save the twins who lay silent in their cribs. So why was the maid, a woman he barely noticed, the only one who could reach them? Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to Ms. Love Stories channel, the place where love, drama, and unforgettable moments come alive. I'm so thrilled you're here, ready to dive into stories that will make your heart race, bring tears, and leave you believing in the power of love. Before we begin, I want to get to know all of you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because in the next video, I'll give a special shout out to some of you amazing viewers from around the world. I can't wait to see how far our love story family reaches. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a single emotional journey. Get ready to feel, laugh, cry, and fall in love all over again, because every story we share here is for you. Now, the story begins. Rose. The mansion didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum, silent, polished, cold. And as Daniel walked through the long marble hallway that morning, the echo of his footsteps was the only proof he wasn't a ghost drifting through his own life. His phone buzzed in his hand. Another board update. Another investment pitch. Another congratulations message that meant nothing. Daniel dismissed it without looking. None of it mattered. Not when his twins lay upstairs in the nursery, staring at the ceiling, unable to move their tiny legs, unable to form a single word. He paused by the tall window overlooking the gardens. The fog rested low over the fountain, and the sunrise cast long shadows across the lawn. The world was waking, but inside him, everything felt permanently dusk. He rubbed his forehead. I should be able to fix this, he whispered to himself, voice low trembling. I fix everything. But he couldn't fix them, and the guilt ate into him like frostbite. In another part of the mansion, Helen moved quietly through the hallway outside the nursery, holding a small basket of freshly washed baby blankets. She placed them gently on the cribside table and paused, her fingers brushing the soft fabric. The twins lay in their cribs, Mateo and Martine, beautiful, fragile, and heartbreakingly still. Buenos dias, Mis Angelitos, she whispered softly. Though she knew they couldn't respond, she always greeted them like this. Her voice was warm, soothing, the kind of voice that held a trembling soul together. Helen reached into her apron pocket and pulled out 2 tiny knitted socks. Ones she made secretly at night in her small staff room. She slipped them onto the twins' motionless feet. There, she murmured. To keep you warm. She stood there longer than she needed to, her eyes softening with something almost maternal. Something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Then, hearing footsteps, she stepped back quickly. Walls up. Expression blank. Voice silent. The maid must never feel too much. The maid must never be seen. Daniel entered the nursery. Helen bowed her head respectfully without meeting his eyes. He glanced at the twins, his chest tightening. Morning, he whispered, though it was meant more for them than for her. He noticed the socks. Knitted. Handmade. He didn't own anything in this house that was handmade. Where did these come from? He asked, his tone more curious than accusing. Helen froze. I made them, sir, she said quietly. Daniel blinked. You. She nodded, cheeks warming. They looked cold. It was nothing. Just socks. But somehow, it wasn't nothing. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. His eyes softened, an emotion he didn't quite recognize. Then he cleared his throat and straightened. He couldn't afford to feel anything. Feelings never helped him. Feelings were dangerous. Thank you, he said, almost awkward. Helen's eyes lifted in surprise. Of course, sir. She stepped aside as he moved closer to the cribs. Daniel leaned over, brushing his finger lightly against Mateo's cheek. The baby blinked slowly but didn't turn, didn't move, didn't smile. A familiar crack spread in Daniel's chest. A breaking that came daily, hourly. You deserve a better father, he whispered. Helen heard him, and something in her heart pulled tight. But she said nothing. Later that morning, Daniel sat in his office, papers spread across the desk but unread. His mind stayed upstairs. He replayed Helen's gentle touch, the knitted socks, the way she somehow made the room feel warmer. Why did she care so much? Why did she go beyond what she was paid for? Why did she look at his sons the way he wanted to look at them, but somehow couldn't? He hated that the question stung. Meanwhile, Helen was in the laundry room, folding sheets with mechanical precision. Every fold was exact. Every motion quiet. Every breath controlled. But inside, her thoughts were loud. He saw the socks. He asked about them. He thanked me. No one ever thanked her. Not in years. She caught herself smiling, only to quickly erase it. She wasn't here to hope. She wasn't here to feel seen. Her job was simple. Serve, clean, care for the twins, and disappear into silence. But the truth was, caring wasn't part of her job. Not really. Yet she couldn't help herself. Those babies felt like fate had placed them in her path. And every time she touched their hands, every time she whispered to them, something inside her mended, slowly, painfully, beautifully. That evening, the mansion fell quiet again. Daniel walked past the twins' room on his way to his bedroom. He stopped when he heard something, soft humming. A lullaby. In Spanish. Warm and melodic. He stepped closer, peeking through the cracked door. Helen sat in the rocking chair, holding one of the twins against her chest, cradling him gently even though he couldn't lift his head. She rocked him slowly, humming a song Daniel had never heard. Her eyes were closed. Her cheek rested lightly against the baby's hair. And the baby looked peaceful in a way Daniel had never seen. For a moment, time paused. The cold mansion melted. Everything felt right. Daniel's breath caught. Something inside him trembled. Something he had buried long ago. He didn't know why, but he couldn't look away. And he didn't know it yet, but this was the moment their lives began to intertwine. If you were Daniel, and you saw your employee caring for your children this tenderly, how would you feel? Comment below. Your perspective might help someone reading this. The nursery was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint creak of the rocking chair. Daniel leaned against the doorway, watching Helen cradle Mateo against her chest, her lips moving in a whispered lullaby. The warmth radiating from her presence was foreign, unsettling. He didn't know whether to step in or turn away. He took a cautious step forward. His polished shoes made no sound on the plush carpet. Helen didn't notice him. She was lost in the rhythm of the rocking, the quiet melody, the small miracle of her care. And then he saw it. Helen lifted the twins, one in each arm, and gently moved them in ways Daniel had never imagined. Tiny exercises, subtle stretches, movements designed to coax the weak muscles, to encourage the impossible. Her hands were firm but tender, guided by knowledge he didn't have. He blinked, frozen. She was doing something extraordinary. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. The twins, paralyzed and silent all their lives, responded, ever so slightly, to her touch. A flutter of a hand. A tilt of a head. A tiny, almost imperceptible reaction, but it was there. Alive. Real. He swallowed hard. What is she doing? His own voice sounded strange, intrusive. Helen froze, then turned sharply, eyes wide. Sir. I didn't hear you come in. Her voice trembled. I saw. Daniel's words were clipped, but inside something had shattered. What are you doing to them? Helen's hands shook, but she didn't put the twins down. I'm helping them. Just a little. Their muscles, their reflexes. If I do this every day. Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard, avoiding his gaze. It's nothing. Just trying to make them comfortable. Daniel stepped closer, his chest tight. This isn't just comfort. I saw their heads turn, their fingers twitch. They're responding to you. How? Helen's eyes filled with tears. Because I care. I can't just watch them suffer. I know I'm not supposed to. You're not supposed to? Daniel's voice rose slightly, disbelief shaking his tone. Helen, you're doing what doctors couldn't. You're making them move. Helen's lips quivered. I only want to help. I never expected. Daniel swallowed. The anger he didn't realize had been simmering melted into awe. His fists clenched, then released. Every ounce of his control, his authority, his perfectly ordered life, felt inadequate compared to the small miracle happening before him. He wanted to step forward and touch the twins, but he hesitated. This was her moment. Not his. And yet he couldn't look away. The twins stirred slightly, their tiny movements more pronounced. Daniel felt a pang in his chest. Guilt and hope tangled together. He had spent his life building walls around himself, around his heart, around his family. And now, watching her hands work magic with the children, those walls began to crack. Why didn't anyone tell me? Daniel asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Helen's shoulders shook. Because no one could do it. I didn't think you'd understand. You'd think I was overstepping my place. I just wanted them to feel alive, even if just a little. Daniel's eyes searched hers. Vulnerability, fear, love, helpless hope. He realized, for the first time, that Helen was more than just a maid. She had been carrying their secret world, their chance at life on her shoulders, and doing it quietly, selflessly. He swallowed again, his throat dry. You've done this every day? Helen nodded, tears now freely falling. Every day since they were born. Every day I've been trying to give them something I can't give anyone else. Daniel wanted to say something. Thank you? Sorry. How can I repay you? But no words came. All he could do was watch, helpless and amazed. The tiny flutter of a hand. The tilt of a head. A silent miracle in the dim glow of the nursery light. The room felt suspended in time. The city outside moved on, but here, in this small universe, love was bending reality, bending possibility. Daniel realized something he hadn't admitted before. He had been wrong. Wrong to think money and power could fix everything. Wrong to think he could control life. Wrong to think he could protect his children from everything. Because he hadn't been protecting them from this. From a miracle he never imagined. From a love he hadn't seen. From a woman who was brave enough to defy rules to save lives quietly. And as Helen looked up, seeing him in the doorway, something shifted. A fragile, trembling connection sparked. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew it changed everything. For Daniel, the world had always been a place of rules and certainty. But tonight, in the nursery's soft glow, it became a place of wonder, danger, and fragile hope. And he couldn't turn away. Not from the children, not from her, not from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could all heal together. He stepped closer, slowly, uncertain. The twins moved slightly at his approach, almost as if sensing his presence for the first time. Helen caught his gaze. For a fleeting moment, the barriers between them, power, distance, fear, fell away. And in that moment, Daniel understood. Nothing in his world had prepared him for this. The twins. Helen. The impossible hope that had quietly grown every day in secret. Something had begun. Something fragile, miraculous, and terrifying. Something that would change all of their lives forever. If you were Daniel and saw your children responding to someone you barely knew, would you trust her, or be afraid? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The morning after what Daniel could only call a revelation, the mansion felt heavier. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, but it did little to warm the cold walls. Daniel sat at his desk, perfectly straight, perfectly composed on the surface, but inside a storm raged. He kept replaying the scene in the nursery. Helen cradling the twins, guiding their movements with quiet precision, and them responding miraculously. He should have felt grateful. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt unsure. Why had she never told him? Why had she been doing this in secret? Was it her place to interfere with his children in ways he couldn't even comprehend? Daniel rubbed his eyes and ran a hand through his hair. He wanted to reach out to Helen, to speak to her, to somehow thank her, but he couldn't. He was Daniel. He commanded his world. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt powerless. Meanwhile, Helen moved quietly through her duties, folding laundry and straightening cushions with mechanical precision. She had spent the night tossing and turning, thinking of Daniel's gaze, the way his chest had tightened, the way his voice had faltered. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to justify herself. But fear kept her silent. If he disapproved, if he thought she overstepped, she would lose everything. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about the twins. Their small, miraculous responses haunted her. Tiny fingers twitching, heads tilting, eyes fluttering. She had seen them move in ways that shouldn't have been possible. And somehow, Daniel had seen too. She hated the thought that he might think she was reckless, selfish, or audacious. She hated that she wanted him to understand. She hated that her heart was already quietly leaning toward him. The day dragged on. Daniel kept himself busy with meetings, calls, emails, all carefully orchestrated distractions. He spoke with colleagues, smiled, made decisions, but inside every moment was interrupted by a mental image. Helen's hands, the twins responding, her soft humming voice. He wanted to confront her, but he was paralyzed by fear. What if he misinterpreted her intentions? What if she had been doing it for selfish reasons? What if he allowed himself to feel gratitude and it turned into attachment he wasn't ready for? Helen, on the other hand, avoided his gaze. She moved with deliberate caution whenever Daniel entered the room. Her voice was polite but clipped. Every interaction became a delicate dance, balancing professionalism and personal emotion. That evening, a minor crisis arose. One of the twins refused to eat, muscles stiff, eyes wide and anxious. Helen rushed in to soothe him, and Daniel followed from a distance, lingering near the doorway. He watched, torn between awe and apprehension, as Helen coaxed the baby, whispering words of comfort. Daniel felt a flicker of jealousy, not romantic but protective. How could someone else touch his children this way? And yet he knew he could never do it himself. His hands felt clumsy, his voice foreign to them. He clenched his fists at his sides. He should leave. He should assert control. He should stop himself from becoming vulnerable. Helen sensed him lingering and glanced up, briefly catching his eyes. Her expression softened, but she quickly returned to the baby, pretending not to notice. Daniel turned away. He would not let himself linger. He would not let this closeness take root. He would not fall into a web of emotions he had no plan to navigate. Over the next few days, tension thickened. Daniel maintained distance, offering curt acknowledgments and instructions. Helen carried on with her secret care, careful to avoid his notice, careful to avoid mistakes. Both were caught between longing and restraint, admiration and fear, responsibility and desire. Every glance became loaded with meaning, every brief touch accidental yet electric. Neither spoke of it, both pretended it didn't exist. But the air between them thrummed with suppressed emotions. Daniel began leaving early for meetings he didn't really need to attend, avoiding the nursery when he could. Helen found herself lingering longer than she should, checking on the twins one more time, adjusting blankets, humming softly to calm them. Both acted as if everything were normal. Both were silently unraveling. One night, Daniel sat alone in the study, glass of whiskey untouched. He allowed himself to admit, silently, reluctantly, that he had thought of Helen more than once that day. Not in a romantic sense, not yet, but in a way that shook him to his core. She had crossed the boundaries of his orderly world and unsettled him in ways he couldn't define. He hated the vulnerability he felt. He hated the way he wanted to watch, to know, to intervene. He hated that she had become someone he cared about in a place he had sworn to protect from everything. Helen, in her tiny room off the servants' wing, stared out the window at the mansion lights. Her mind kept drifting back to Daniel's gaze, the rare moment of softened awe, the brief acknowledgement of her efforts. She knew she shouldn't feel hope. She knew she shouldn't feel seen. And yet she did. Both were resisting what was already happening. Both were terrified of what it might mean. Both were holding back from stepping into the fragile possibility of connection. And that resistance, silent, stubborn, invisible, set the stage for the next inevitable collision. A moment where circumstance would force them together, where the walls of control, fear, and propriety would have to come down. Have you ever wanted to reach out to someone, but fear or pride stopped you? Share your story in the comments. It might help someone facing the same struggle. The mansion was quieter than usual that evening. A storm had rolled in over the city. Rain slashing against the tall windows, wind rattling the glass. The weather forced everyone indoors, and the nursery, usually calm and orderly, became the center of an unavoidable confrontation. Daniel had just returned from an evening meeting, soaked from the unexpected downpour. He had been hoping for solitude, for a chance to retreat into his controlled world. But when he passed the nursery, he saw the door slightly ajar. Inside, Helen was trying to manage both twins, one squirming, the other restless, the storm outside amplifying their anxiety. Without thinking, Daniel stepped in. The sound of his shoes on the wooden floor startled the twins, and Helen flinched. "I can handle this," she said quickly, her voice a mixture of pride and tension. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? You've got two restless babies in the middle of a storm. Maybe I can help." Helen shook her head. "No, it's fine. I've got it." But within minutes, it became clear that she couldn't manage both alone. One twin was crying, the other twisting in the crib, the thunder making them even more agitated. Daniel felt a pang in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Helplessness. "I'm not going to just stand here," he said, rolling up his sleeves. He knelt beside the crib, steadying the twins with careful hands. Helen's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise and relief flashing across her face. They worked together in silence. Daniel mimicked her gentle motions, following the rhythm she had developed over weeks of secret care. Every lift, every soothing touch, every whisper she gave them had a new weight now, because he was part of it. Neither of them spoke much. Words were unnecessary. Actions carried the depth of trust, frustration, and vulnerability between them. The storm raged outside, but in the nursery, a fragile harmony formed. Helen's glance met Daniel's. A spark of acknowledgement passed between them. An unspoken agreement. They were in this together. Daniel felt emotions he wasn't ready to label. Awe. Gratitude. Something closer to admiration than he had allowed himself to feel in years. He caught himself noticing the smallest details. The way her hair fell across her shoulders, the steadiness of her hands, the tenderness in her voice. Helen, in turn, was aware of his presence in a way that made her both nervous and oddly reassured. He was close, yet respectful. Strong, yet careful. She realized she didn't want him to leave, though she would never admit it aloud. The twins slowly calmed. Daniel and Helen worked in seamless coordination, a silent choreography born of necessity and growing connection. When the storm finally passed, both children were asleep, nestled in the warmth of their blankets. For a moment, the room was still. Rain-soaked streets beyond the windows, quieted cries of the babies, and the exhausted, unspoken relief between them created a strange intimacy. Helen finally spoke, her voice low. "Thank you for stepping in." Daniel shrugged, trying to mask his emotions. "You didn't need help. I just didn't want them to be upset." She smiled faintly, but her eyes betrayed her relief and something deeper. A feeling she hadn't intended to share. Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say more, to acknowledge the awe he felt at her courage and dedication. But he swallowed it. Words weren't necessary. Actions had spoken louder than anything he could say. He straightened, brushing rain from his coat. "You've done an incredible job. The twins, they respond to you. I don't understand how, but it works." Helen's cheeks warmed. I just try. That's all." The unspoken tension between them remained, thick and charged. Both knew this forced proximity had shifted something fundamental. A new awareness, a fragile bond, had begun to form. Not romantic yet, not declared, but undeniably present. As Daniel prepared to leave the nursery, he paused. His hand brushed against hers briefly as she adjusted a blanket. The contact was brief, but it left both of them aware of the invisible threads now connecting them. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The storm had passed, but its residue lingered. The sense of dependence, trust, and tentative connection had been established. Both Daniel and Helen understood, without saying it, that the next steps in their relationship would not be under their full control. This forced proximity had cracked their walls just enough to let something new, something dangerous and beautiful, begin to grow. Have you ever been forced into a situation with someone that made you see them differently? Comment below. How would you handle a moment like Daniel and Helen's? The next day carried an unusual quietness. The storm had left the city drenched, but inside the mansion, there was a heavier kind of tension. Daniel moved through the hallways with his usual precision. Yet his mind was elsewhere, haunted by the events of the previous night. Helen's presence, her hands, the miraculous responses of the twins. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He found her in the nursery, humming softly as she adjusted the blankets around the twins. Both children were asleep, their small bodies still, but Daniel noticed how her gaze lingered on them, her expression tender, almost reverent. "Daniel," Helen said softly, as if sensing his presence. Her voice held a fragile calm, though there was a hesitation, a weight of something unsaid. He stepped inside, hands in his pockets, trying to appear composed. "I need to understand," he said slowly. "How did you know what to do? How did you manage to help them?" Helen looked away for a moment, biting her lower lip. Then she took a deep breath. "There's something I've never told anyone. Not even my family." Her eyes met his, glimmering with vulnerability. "Before I came here, I trained. Special care for children with disabilities. Babies with paralysis, speech difficulties. I learned how to stimulate their muscles, encourage reflexes, give them hope when hope seemed impossible." Daniel felt the words strike him like a wave. He had suspected dedication, but this was far beyond ordinary. "You did all of this in secret?" Helen nodded, her hands fiddling with a small blanket. "Yes. I didn't want anyone to misunderstand. I didn't want to seem arrogant or intrusive. I just wanted to give them a chance to feel alive, even in small ways." Daniel remained silent, his mind racing. For the first time, he saw her not as an employee, not as someone beneath him in social hierarchy, but as a woman of courage and skill, who had quietly fought for his children's tiny victories. She hesitated, then added, "There's more." Her voice cracked. I lost my brother when I was young. He was born with severe complications, and no one could help him. I watched him suffer, and I couldn't save him. That guilt. It's why I dedicate myself to children like this. I promised myself I would never let another child suffer, if I could help." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He had always prided himself on control, wealth, power. But here was a woman whose past grief and selfless determination far surpassed anything he had known. The twins' tiny movements, their responses to her hands, now made sense. It wasn't just skill. It was love, pain, devotion. He walked closer, careful not to startle her. "Helen, I didn't know." His voice softened, uncharacteristically. "All this time I thought I had to protect them, control their world. But you've given them more than I could. And more than I realized they needed." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do it for recognition. I just wanted them to know life is possible. That even if their bodies are weak, they can feel, they can respond, they can be alive in their own way." Daniel swallowed hard. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the heater and the distant traffic outside. The twins stirred slightly in their sleep, tiny fingers flexing, heads tilting, as if sensing the new understanding forming between the adults. I underestimated you," Daniel admitted, his usual pride giving way. "I judged too quickly. I thought I could handle everything, protect them in my own way. But you've shown me. There's so much I don't understand. And yet, I see now that what you've done, it's extraordinary." Helen finally let herself relax slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. I hope you can trust me. I hope you can see that everything I've done was for them." Daniel nodded, the weight of unspoken words between them heavier than ever. I do trust you. I want to. I see now that you've been part of their world in ways I could never imagine." Helen smiled faintly, but there was a vulnerability in her expression that made Daniel's chest tighten. He realized that trust was just the beginning. The connection they were forming was fragile, delicate, and demanded honesty. Then, with a sudden shift in the air, Daniel's thoughts went to his own past failures, the walls he had built around himself, the emotional distance he had kept from everyone, including his children. Seeing Helen's past pain and dedication reflected a mirror he hadn't wanted to look into. He understood now that healing, love, and connection were not things he could command. They had to be earned, nurtured, and allowed to grow. For Helen, sharing her story had been terrifying. But now, seeing Daniel's reaction, the respect and awe in his eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A possibility of being truly seen, of being valued not just for her work, but for who she was. In that room, with the storm gone and the twins quietly resting, an invisible bridge formed between them. One built of honesty, vulnerability, and shared purpose. For the first time, both understood that the story of the past, the grief, the sacrifices, the secrets, was not a barrier. It was the very thing that could bring them closer. Daniel reached out tentatively, touching her hand briefly. Helen looked up, surprised, and then nodded ever so slightly. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. They were no longer alone in their struggles. The twins, still sleeping, seemed almost to sense it too. Their tiny fingers twitched, subtle signs of life and hope that mirrored the new understanding growing between the adults. And for Daniel and Helen, that understanding marked a turning point. They could no longer resist the pull between them. The walls had been breached, not by force, but by truth, empathy, and shared history. The next steps would be uncertain, messy, and emotional. But now, finally, they had a foundation. Have you ever shared a personal story that changed how someone saw you? Comment below. Your story could inspire someone to open up too. The following week brought a sense of cautious normalcy to the mansion. The storm had cleared the city streets, and sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting warm patterns across the polished floors. Yet inside the house, something subtle had shifted. A quiet tension softened by understanding and shared experience. Daniel found himself lingering in the hallways more often, walking past the nursery without a reason, simply drawn by the presence of Helen and the twins. He caught her once humming to the babies, her gentle tone carrying a rhythm that seemed almost magical. He realized he had been holding back his admiration, his growing fondness, for far too long. Helen, aware of his subtle presence, no longer felt the same tension when he entered a room. She had begun to trust his quiet support, and was slowly letting herself enjoy the small moments of collaboration. Laughing softly when one twin kicked unexpectedly, or exchanging a knowing glance with Daniel when the other responded to a touch. One afternoon, a minor accident in the nursery brought them even closer. One of the twins toppled slightly in the crib, a small but frightening movement. Helen gasped and quickly reached out, catching the baby just in time. Daniel, standing nearby, felt a surge of protective instinct. Without thinking, he moved closer to help, their hands brushing as they steadied the tiny body together. For a heartbeat, the world outside the nursery seemed to disappear. Rain from a previous storm tapped gently on the windows. The twins cooed softly in their sleep, and Daniel felt a rare, unguarded connection with Helen. Neither spoke immediately, but the touch, the shared care, communicated more than words ever could. Helen finally broke the silence. "You're getting better at this," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Daniel chuckled, a rare, light sound that surprised even him. "I'm learning from the best," he admitted, meeting her eyes with a warmth he had been trying to contain. There was a pause, a shared moment of recognition. Both understood that their connection had moved beyond respect and trust. Something fragile but real was beginning to form, built on small victories, shared care, and emotional honesty. Days passed in a rhythm of quiet collaboration. Daniel would lift the twins carefully when Helen needed a hand. Helen would instruct him softly, teaching him the techniques that had once been her secret. And slowly, the barriers between them fell away. One evening, after the twins had been tucked into their cribs, Helen and Daniel found themselves sitting across from each other in the nursery, exhausted but calm. For a moment, they simply watched the children sleep, the room filled with the soft rhythm of breathing and distant city sounds. Daniel spoke first, quietly. "You've given them more than I ever could. I've been so focused on control, on doing things the right way, and I miss so much." Helen looked at him, her eyes reflecting relief and something deeper. Gratitude, perhaps, or the fragile warmth of emotional connection. "We've missed it together," she said softly. "But now maybe we can do it together." He nodded, a tentative smile crossing his face. "Together," he repeated. The trust that had begun with silent collaboration had now blossomed into shared vulnerability. They laughed softly at small mishaps, shared quiet stories of their past, and began to speak openly about fears and hopes they had kept hidden. Daniel found himself revealing personal doubts he had never admitted, and Helen shared small memories of her lost brother, her own childhood, and the lessons that had shaped her. In those moments, the twins became the invisible glue binding them, a reminder that their bond was about more than attraction. It was about care, trust, and shared responsibility. They laughed when one twin hiccuped loudly, cried softly when the other whimpered in his sleep, and found comfort in the rhythm of tending to lives smaller and more vulnerable than their own. For Daniel, the emotional growth was profound. He realized that his world of control and wealth could never replace genuine connection, laughter, or the tender intimacy of shared purpose. Helen had unlocked something in him that no business deal, no mansion, no status could ever touch. The ability to feel deeply, vulnerably, and wholly. For Helen, the bond with Daniel was equally transformative. She had always kept walls around her heart, cautious from past loss and fear. But Daniel's presence, steady, respectful, yet emotionally engaged, allowed her to soften, to trust again, to believe that love and care could exist alongside loyalty and professionalism. The nursery became a sanctuary not just for the twins but for them as well. A place where laughter, quiet conversations, and gentle touch replaced tension and fear. In these small, fragile interactions, they found hope, connection, and a deepening sense of belonging. And in that quiet space, they both understood. Whatever challenges awaited, whatever storms might come, the bond they had formed could weather them. It was fragile, yes, but it was real, and it was theirs. Have you ever formed a bond through shared care or responsibility? Comment below. Sometimes connection grows in the most unexpected ways. The fragile bond that had begun to form between Daniel and Helen faced its first real test. It was a late evening, the mansion quiet except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Daniel had returned from a long day of meetings, expecting calm, but what he found instead unsettled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. A note lay on the nursery counter, hastily scribbled in Helen's handwriting. "I'm sorry. I need some time alone. Please don't try to find me." His heart clenched. Confusion, worry, and an unfamiliar ache of fear surged through him. Daniel had come to rely on Helen's presence, on her subtle guidance, her quiet care. And now she was gone. Or at least she had retreated. He searched the house room by room, calling her name, but the only response was the soft rustle of curtains and the distant hum of the city. The twins stirred in their cribs, sensing the tension in the air. Daniel's chest tightened further. He realized, painfully, how much he had come to depend on Helen, not just for the children's care, but for the emotional balance she had begun to bring into his life. Meanwhile, Helen sat on a park bench several blocks away, wrapped in her coat, her eyes clouded with doubt and self-reproach. She had left in a moment of panic after an incident with a visitor in the mansion. A business associate of Daniel's had insinuated that her closeness with the children was inappropriate. Helen, sensitive to judgment and protective of the twins, had chosen to flee rather than confront the accusation, fearing that any defense might fall short and damage her fragile standing. She hadn't anticipated the toll leaving would take on her. The moment she saw the twins' faces in her mind, their tiny hands reaching, their innocent eyes looking for reassurance, her resolve faltered. She felt a deep ache, a mixture of guilt and longing, knowing that the very bond she had worked so hard to build was now at risk. Back in the mansion, Daniel felt frustration rising, laced with fear. He recognized the pattern from his own life. Walls built too quickly, pride getting in the way of emotional clarity. He had to choose. Let his ego dictate his actions, or risk vulnerability by reaching out. But for the first time he wasn't thinking about control or pride. He was thinking about her, and about the twins who had grown accustomed to her gentle presence. He grabbed his coat and drove through the quiet streets, the night cold and heavy around him. Every passing streetlight reminded him of the quiet hours in the nursery. Helen's whispered instructions, her careful touch. He couldn't let fear, misunderstanding, or pride dictate the outcome. When he finally found her in the park, she was staring at the ground, her hands wrapped around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Daniel approached slowly, his voice gentle but firm. "Helen," he said, "please don't run from me. Don't run from what we've built." She looked up, eyes glossy with unshed tears. I didn't know what else to do," she admitted. "Someone questioned me, my intentions, and I panicked. I thought leaving was the safest choice." Daniel knelt beside her carefully, his tone calm but intense. "And in doing so, you left more than yourself behind. You left the twins, and you left me. We can't afford to run from fear, Helen. Not anymore." Her shoulders shook slightly, tears finally spilling. "I know," she whispered. I didn't want to ruin everything." Daniel reached for her hand. For the first time, There was no pretense, no caution, just truth and urgency. "You've never ruined anything," he said. "You've given them life, hope, and me, a chance to feel again. Don't let pride or fear make you leave that behind." Helen's chest rose and fell rapidly. She wanted to shrink away, to apologize endlessly, but the sincerity in his eyes and the warmth of his presence anchored her. She realized that the incident at the mansion, harsh words, implied accusations, was nothing compared to what they had together. Slowly, hesitantly, she allowed herself to be pulled into the moment, letting her hand rest in his. The silence between them was heavy with emotion, but it was no longer tense. It was a bridge of understanding. They sat together until the twins would have been asleep, sharing small words of apology, reassurance, and the unspoken acknowledgement that the bond they had fought to build could survive missteps, doubts, and fears. For Daniel, the shatter point had been a revelation. Vulnerability, not control, was the true measure of strength. For Helen, the realization was equally powerful. She could trust, even in the face of doubt and fear, that what was real would endure. And as they walked back to the mansion together, hands intertwined, they understood. The first fracture in their bond had not destroyed them. It had only made the connection stronger, forged through honesty, courage, and the willingness to confront pain rather than hide from it. The storm outside had long passed, but the emotional turbulence they had faced mirrored the reality of love and connection. Beautiful, fragile, and worth fighting for. Have you ever faced a moment that almost broke a relationship, but honesty saved it? Comment below. How did you overcome it? The night after the confrontation in the park, the mansion was quiet but heavy with anticipation. Daniel sat alone in the nursery, the twins finally asleep, their tiny breathing slow and even. He held one of the baby blankets, letting it drape over his lap, thinking about everything that had happened, the storm, the revelations, Helen's past, and the near collapse of the bond they had been building. The truth was undeniable. Helen had become indispensable, not just to the twins, but to him. She had given them life, hope, and care in ways he never could. And yet, despite the clarity of his feelings, a voice inside urged caution. Pride and fear whispered, "What if she leaves again? What if vulnerability opens the door to pain?" Meanwhile, Helen sat in her small study, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm light across her face. She held a photo of her late brother in her hands, a silent reminder of her past pain, and her dedication to children like the twins. The memory of the accusation at the mansion, the shadow of judgment, still haunted her. She knew that opening her heart fully to Daniel meant risking everything. Trust, pride, even her emotional stability. The night stretched, heavy with indecision. And then, as if drawn by the same invisible thread, both reached a similar realization simultaneously. The only way forward was honesty and vulnerability, nothing less. Daniel was the first to act. He found Helen in the study, hesitating at the doorway, unsure if she was ready to face him. "Helen," he said softly, "I don't want us to go backward. I can't imagine my life, or theirs, without you fully here. I'm done hiding behind pride or fear. I need to tell you, I care about you. I love what you've done for them. And I love what you've done for me." Helen froze, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. The words hit her with a force she hadn't expected. Her chest tightened, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "Daniel, she stammered, voice wavering. "I've been so scared. Scared of losing you, scared of being judged, scared of letting myself feel. But I can't deny it anymore. I feel the same. I love you too." The words hung in the air, fragile yet powerful. It was the culmination of every stolen glance, every shared secret, every quiet moment in the nursery. The choice was clear. Hide behind fear, or embrace the bond that had grown stronger than either of them could have imagined. Slowly, Daniel took her hand, holding it with reverence and tenderness. The weight of the past, the pride, the near break, the insecurities, began to melt away in the warmth of their shared understanding. "We'll face everything together," he whispered. "The twins, the challenges, the judgments, everything." Helen nodded, a fragile smile forming, relief and joy mingling in her expression. "Together," she echoed. For a long moment, they simply sat there, hands intertwined, the twins' soft breathing the only sound besides their quiet heartbeats. The choice had been made, not lightly but deliberately, with courage and honesty. This decision rippled through their world immediately. The mansion felt lighter, filled with an unspoken promise. Every glance at the twins, every shared responsibility, every whispered instruction carried the weight of mutual trust and love. Daniel felt a deep sense of peace he had never known. And Helen allowed herself to fully relax for the first time in years. Later, as they tucked the twins into their cribs together, Daniel looked at Helen, his eyes reflecting awe and gratitude. "You've changed everything," he murmured. "No, we've changed everything," Helen corrected softly, leaning her head briefly on his shoulder. In that quiet, intimate space, they understood that the choice to be vulnerable and to embrace love was not just about their bond, but about creating a stable, nurturing world for the twins. Every fear, every hesitation, every past pain was no longer a barrier. It was the foundation on which they could build something lasting. That night, for the first time, both Daniel and Helen allowed themselves to feel fully, without restraint. They laughed quietly at small missteps with the twins, exchanged gentle smiles, and held each other in a silent acknowledgement of the strength of the connection they had chosen to protect and nurture. The choice had been made, but it was only the beginning. Every day afterward would be a continuation of that commitment, a conscious decision to trust, to love, and to build a family together. They knew challenges would come, but the shatter point, the fears, and the near loss had shown them that their bond was resilient and worth every effort. And as they finally retired for the night, the mansion quiet except for the soft breaths of the twins, Daniel and Helen knew they had chosen correctly. Love, honesty, and vulnerability had triumphed over fear, and a new chapter of life, hope, and shared purpose had begun. Have you ever faced a choice between fear and love? Comment below. How did you decide? The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the mansion, casting golden light across the polished floors. Daniel woke first, quietly slipping out of bed so as not to disturb Helen, who was still nestled under the covers. The house felt different, lighter, warmer, almost alive with the sense of hope and renewal that had taken root over the past days. He paused at the nursery door, listening to the soft coos of the twins. Their tiny faces were peaceful, oblivious to the turmoil and triumphs that had occurred around them. Daniel felt a swell of gratitude and awe. These children, once so fragile and dependent, had become the silent heartbeat of their shared journey, the living reminder of the bond he and Helen had fought to nurture. Helen soon appeared at his side, brushing a hand along his arm, her eyes soft and warm. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning," he replied, smiling, his voice filled with tenderness. Together, they entered the nursery, the twins stirring slightly as they recognized the familiar presence of both parents. Helen lifted one of the babies into her arms while Daniel took the other, and for a moment, the three of them, the two of them and their little charges, formed a perfect circle of warmth, love, and care. They laughed softly at the tiny movements, the subtle hiccups, the fingers that reached for comfort and touch. There was no pretense, no fear, only connection, shared responsibility, and the quiet joy of family. The mansion, with all its grandeur, suddenly felt like a home in the truest sense. Not just a house, but a place of love, safety, and belonging. After breakfast, Daniel and Helen sat together in the sunroom, watching the twins play on a soft rug. The room was filled with light and life, a reflection of the new chapter they had chosen to write. Daniel reached for Helen's hand across the table, their fingers intertwining naturally, effortlessly. "I never imagined this," he said softly. "That amidst chaos, fear, and near heartbreak, we could find something so perfect." Helen smiled, a warmth in her eyes that spoke of relief, love, and quiet pride. "It's perfect because we chose it," she replied. "We chose each other, and we chose to trust, to love, to fight for what matters." The twins giggled, crawling toward them, tiny hands grabbing at fingers and clothes. Daniel lifted them, letting them rest in his arms while Helen adjusted their blankets. And together they shared a moment of unspoken harmony. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless, a testament to resilience, love, and the power of connection. Later that afternoon, a visitor arrived at the mansion. It was a close friend who had witnessed the struggles and whispered rumors that once threatened to destabilize Helen's position. They looked around, seeing the harmony, the laughter, and the undeniable bond between the two adults and their children. "You've built something extraordinary here," the friend said, voice filled with admiration. "It's rare to see love, trust, and care intertwined so fully." Daniel and Helen exchanged a glance, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had endured. Every misunderstanding, every fear, every near break had brought them to this moment. Whole, unafraid, and fully present. As evening fell, the mansion glowed with warm light, and the twins were tucked into their cribs. Daniel and Helen lingered in the nursery, sitting close together, their hands entwined, watching the peaceful faces of the children they had come to adore. "We did it," Helen whispered. "We did," Daniel agreed, a rare, genuine smile spreading across his face. "And we'll keep doing it every day." The house was quiet again, but now it was a comfortable silence, a silence of contentment rather than tension. Outside, the city hummed softly, unaware of the small triumph that had taken place within the mansion walls. But for Daniel, Helen, and the twins, the world felt complete, safe, and full of promise. Before retiring for the night, Daniel turned to Helen, his voice low and full of emotion. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting me, for loving me, for letting me be part of this." Helen smiled, brushing her fingers through his hair. "And thank you," she replied softly, "for being patient, for caring, for choosing to be vulnerable with me." They held each other for a long moment, the warmth of shared love and trust enveloping them. The journey had been difficult, marked by fear, misunderstanding, and heartache, but the destination was undeniable. Reunion, redemption, and love at last. As they finally left the nursery, Daniel and Helen walked hand in hand down the quiet halls, the soft glow of the evening light reflecting the calm and joy that had settled over their home. In the twins' laughter, the small gestures of care, and in each other's eyes, they knew that the central event, the shocking revelation that had brought them together, was no longer just a memory. It was a catalyst for connection, for change, and for love that would endure. The mansion, once a place of tension and uncertainty, had become a sanctuary, a testament to perseverance, emotional courage, and the transformative power of love. Daniel and Helen had chosen each other, chosen vulnerability over fear, and chosen hope over doubt. In that choice, they had discovered something greater than wealth or control. They had discovered family, trust, and the unexpected love that had been waiting for them all along. And as the night settled over the city, with the twins sleeping soundly and the mansion bathed in the soft glow of lamps, Daniel and Helen knew, without question, that their love story had reached its beautiful resolution. A life rebuilt, hearts open, and a future filled with hope, joy, and togetherness. Have you ever experienced a love that grew through challenges and vulnerability? Comment below. Share your story of hope and connection. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Your time, your support, and your presence here mean more than words can say. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or kept you watching, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new upload. Until next time, stay blessed, stay strong, and keep believing in love. See you in the next story.